every socialist, and I count myself as one, has always been like a stopped clock that eventually tells the right time. You know, we kept predicting a massive financial collapse ever since I was, 10, and it happened in 2008. So eventually, all our predictions come true. It doesn't mean we were right analytically about it. Look, why do I think that this time it's different? To quote famous economists. First, I'll repeat some of the things I said, but in a different manner, hopefully, helpfully. Take what happened in the summer of 2020 here in London. I think it was the 12th of August, when you had the announcement that your GDP fell by more than 20% for the first time in the history of British capitalism. Remember that? August 2020. The market expectations were for a fall of about 12 to 13%. It was much, much more than that. And yet 16 minutes later, the London Stock Exchange went up. That has never happened before in the history of capitalism. Why did it happen? For a very logical reason. Because market players thought, oh my God, 20 plus, then immediately, nanoseconds later, they thought, okay, if we're panicking, the Bank of England are panicking. So they're going to print loads of money, and they will pump it in our direction, okay, to refloat the disaster. So let's keep buying. Okay, now, this is simply a little tale that I tell in order to capture the manner in which financial markets have completely decoupled from really existing capitalism. And if you think about it, in 2008, we had a 1929, our generation's 1929. The difference with 1929 was that unlike the Hoover administration in the United States in 29 that let the banks fall, the G7, G20, April 2009, Gordon Brown, London, they decided to refloat them. So they went into a spasm of printing mountain ranges of money to refloat the financial markets, which they did very successfully. Proof that if they want to do something, they do. They do it, right? But ever since they did that, and they did it in a staggered way, the European Central Bank really began doing it in 2012 and then went all out in 2015 with Mario Draghi, 1st of March. But the way I see it now, capitalism has completely been hooked on central bank money. And therefore, why is Jeff Bezos $50 billion richer than he was at the beginning of the pandemic? It's not the profits of Amazon, of his businesses. It is the increases in the share market. Because what happens is, QE means that the central bank prints money, they give it, they effectively given a larger overdraft to the Barclays banks, Deutsche Banks of the world. They look at you people, they say, oh, no, we're not going to lend them because they're hopeless. So they pick up the phone, they call Volkswagen, Siemens, Alstom, Google, Apple, and they say, do you want a few billion? Those people don't need money because they already have stashes of money, which itself is a problem because corporations should be borrowing, not saving. But they take the money because it's free. And they take it and they go to the stock exchange and they buy back their own shares. Okay, so now you have a bifurcation of capitalism. You have the companies that maintain profitability because it's not monopoly that they have. For me, Amazon, General Motors had a monopoly or an oligopoly. Amazon is different. It's a platform. It means that you exit capitalism, you exit the market, and you go into a place where everything that's sold or bought are controlled by one company, one algorithm.
Well,
that is very different.
Let's stick, because there's quite a lot in there, Yanis. Let Gillian come back. Let's stick on that QE, quantitative easing, money sloshing about point.
Just one final phrase.
Then I can throw it over to you.
Yeah, one final phrase.
Competitor.
So, if what I'm saying holds water, then Adam Smith is simply not relevant. He's as relevant as Karl Marx was in the Soviet Union when you were there. In other words, not at all.
So you're saying Adam Smith's not relevant because the financial markets today don't tie into the real economy, and because essentially you have platform monopolies on technology.
Yes, and even the companies that are not platform companies, through private equity takeovers, they're being taken over, loaded with debt, which is financialized. Those companies are then split up, asset stripped. So you have the squeezing of the capitalist sector, of what Adam Smith would consider to be the capitalist sector. You know, the squeezing of it completely until all you have is central banks on the one hand, financial markets, and the platforms.
So let me turn around and say it like this. Would you believe that competition is a good thing in an economy?
Absolutely. I wrote a book about it.
Okay, let me ask 4 questions. Do you believe that prices are useful?
Yes, I've read my Hayek.
Okay.
I understand.
Do you believe that profits are a good thing as an incentive and that you should reinvest profit back into ventures?
No. But I do believe
we have an argument.
Hang on. Gillian, wait. Because when you read this, you'll see. There is a chapter in there called Markets Without Capitalism, right? So in it, I try to answer your question by, in this book, I try to create a blueprint of how we could have done things differently.
This is the book.
So in my utopia, in this utopia, in the other now that I call it, markets are essential because Iris, the anthropologist, modeled after you, right? As you know, she says that at some point that the only thing that stops authoritarianism and the Soviet kind of gulag from descending upon us is markets and competition and freedom of enterprise. But the problem is that the moment you have share markets that are being effectively turbocharged through central bank money, and you have the financialization that you experience, and you explain very nicely in the book, then the competition dies.
So your basic argument is with equity markets and the current form of equity markets and stock holding companies, if I understand it rightly. I mean, let me say this. If you believe that competition is valuable, if you believe that prices matter, if you believe in a diversification of different roles and specialist functions, and that's good.
I believe in all that.
Okay. Well, that doesn't make you sound very socialist, with all due respect.
Well, that is not true. Do you remember Oscar Lange?
Sorry?
Oscar Lange.
Right.
Do you remember Oscar Lange?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You may need to remind us.
1920s. One of Friedrich von Hayek's great adversaries. The other was John Maynard Keynes. Oscar Lange was a socialist, communist actually, who believed in not a central, he was completely against the idea of Gosplan, of a central plan, but he was in favor of what effectively I have tried to map out in this book. A market where, let me give you an example, right? Imagine a world where you join a corporation and you get one share, in the same way that you enroll in university and you get a library card. And that library card, that one share, gives you one vote. It allows you to do stuff, borrow books, participate in decision making and so on. And then when you have to leave, you take your capital out and you have to hand over your library card, your one share. Now, just for a moment, go along with this. Imagine you have a market where you have competition between companies that are owned by those who happen to work in them. And you ask me whether I believe in profits. No, I don't, because if you have that system, you have net revenues. Because there is no distinction between profits and wages. Everybody profit shares.
I mean, you're going to chip in and ask, you did say you believed in competition.
Absolutely.
Diversity. And so I wondered then what you're going to do with your profits. So Gillian asked you that. Then you said, and she said that's not socialist. And you said, well, actually it is. But then I got a bit confused. Sorry, this is a bit it's an alternative
define
level
your
of
confusion
economics
so that
course.
I know.
But what would you do with the profits?
Or you reinvest them. Or you divide them. So
hand them out.
Let me give you an example. And this is a really existing example. I won't mention the company, but I've worked for that company back in 2011, 2012. It's in Washington State, United States. So imagine...
Look it up.
Look it up. Imagine a company where the revenue total revenue, is divided in 4 parts. One part is fixed costs, rents, and servers and stuff. The second part is R&D. The third part is the basic income of everybody working, from the janitor all the way to the arch designer. And the fourth part is bonuses. And imagine that the R&D segment is decided as a result of a vote where the employees vote between different business plans that are presented once a year, once every 2 years. The basic pay the same, and then bonuses are decided on the basis of the Eurovision Song Contest scoring system, where every employee gets 100 points, but you can only distribute them, award them to other people depending on your understanding, your appreciation of their estimation.
See, the problem is with your
that sounds actually quite good, except Britain would always lose.
So, this is a different corporate structure, right? The company wants to maximize its revenues. There is competition, but there's no capitalism.
It doesn't
and there's no distinction between wages and profits.
Okay, the idea that workers get skin in the game, yes, absolutely. The idea they have some checks and balances and some involvement, absolutely. The idea you're going to organize 50, 500 people into a committee to take strategic business decisions and take votes. Have you ever tried organizing 10 people into taking swift decisions?
Well, I'm Greek, so I can't organize myself. I have 5 opinions.
Therein lies my point.
5 opinions.
I think you have a slightly higher vision of what humans will do to left their own devices.
No, but it doesn't have to be a committee. It doesn't have to be a committee. Firstly, look, in the company...
in practical terms, can you name one cooperative that has actually swelled in size and become a really effective operation?
Okay, let me tell you that the company I'm referring to had 350 employees and $1.2 billion of revenue a year. And it worked really very well with completely flat management.
So why aren't there more companies copying that?
Because they're being gobbled up. This is why. Because, think of the trustee savings bank. Remember what happened to it? It was gobbled up. So the idea of cooperatives that work is well established from the 19th century in this country. You had cooperative banks, cooperative supermarkets and so on that work magnificently, but in an environment, in an economic environment where, the large fish eats the smaller fish, especially, the smaller energetic fish. It's happening in Silicon Valley all the time.
But the issue is
the Google and so on, they're destroying competition by buying them up. So, that company in particular, right, you have no idea, I mean, I'm sure you do, the extent to which there were all these attempts by big money to buy it out. And it will go.
But that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue because you're basically arguing 2 things. On the one hand, you have the question of what's the best way to organize a bunch of people who want to be in business and get money to fund that? Should they sit around as a happy cooperative and sing Kumbaya? And
it doesn't have to be happy. It's not going to be happy, and you know that.
Unhappy cooperative.
Low blow.
But that's one question, i.e., how do they get money to finance what they're doing? And the second question then is there a regulatory structure to create a level playing field that stops the winners from essentially taking all and buying up the others? They're 2 separate questions.
This is great.
And I would agree on the second point that absolutely we need better umpires to create regulatory structures that stop winners taking all and doing unfair competition. It comes back to my 4 points about Adam Smith. On the question of how to organize companies, yes, cooperatives can sometimes work. Yes, I happen to think that with digital technology, probably it's getting easier to organize that than before. And digital transparency is changing things radically. Indeed. And I think in many ways may be the savior of capitalism. And I can talk about that if you want. However, I happen to think that in most cases, the ability to raise outside money from people who have a stake in a company, which is called an equity market, is a pretty efficient way of doing it unless, and I would agree with you, unless you have central banks printing oodles of cash, which essentially is distorting prices right now. I don't like what the central banks have done in recent years at all.
Yeah, but you know what, Gillian? It can't be otherwise. We are in this situation where now, if central banks stop printing money, the whole thing collapses.
So you're saying you don't like capitalism 2021 version, but there could be other sorts that you do.
That you are being completely utopic. in your...
I'm being utopic.
Absolutely.
You're being utopic.
Well, let's be utopic in a realistic way, shall we?
And no, I'm wondering why it wasn't utopia.
I think the idea, for instance, the idea that
By the way, I think utopic sounds much trendier than utopia. It
sounds like it's so 20 sounds like a nasty
I think
condition.
that my utopia is more realistic than yours. The idea of going back to a capitalism that works is absolutely impossible now. And you mentioned, you talked about the importance of having umpires, of having proper regulation. It's impossible. They will always be captured because the concentration of power now under this, what I call techno-feudalism, is always going to be so gigantic that there is no government on this planet, however well-meaning its functionaries, that can do it. This is why I'm saying that if you really want competition and freedom and liberalism to be given a chance, we need to move away from share markets. We need to go to a system where you ask the question, where does the capital come in from? From savings. We need to do that which Adam Smith recognized, because Adam Smith was exactly on my side here. He was totally against public limited companies, because he understood that the moment you have liquid ownership, you have the ownership split up in tiny little pieces that can be traded anonymously in the stock exchange, suddenly his prerequisites for a well-functioning competitive market are gone.
So why not just have pension funds, automatic enrollment, to have people owning asset, mutual funds and things like that, providing some of the fuel for investing in companies, and then combine that with radical digital transparency so that people can actually track what companies are doing and actually express an idea, a vote if they want to.
Because I'm going to move us on
because the pension funds are taken over. The pension funds will always be taken over by those who happen to have a greater percentage of ownership than others. They will all, I mean, look at the three big, State Street, Vanguard, and so on. They control 90% of the New York Stock Exchange. So who controls them?
So why not work on reforming the pension funds and getting better financial oversight and regulation, and working with a system that appears to actually in many ways spark innovation and growth? It can be done better, but why not work with that rather than aspire for something which has never actually materialized anywhere in the world on any scale effectively?
But Gillian, capitalism never materialized anywhere in the world until it did. Huh?
Save it for the Q&A. You're going to be first. It's always good to know there's someone in the audience who's...
And in any case, I'm arguing that capitalism is already evolving out of itself.
I want to move us on because I think we're in danger, perhaps, on the markets and models. I just want to put a bit of a squeeze on Gillian on one point that I've heard, and this is the problem of the big tech monopolies and what that means. I mean, just to remind ourselves, the unprecedented levels of growth and consolidation. Yanis,
so what are you going to do about Facebook?
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying is, corporate law which says one employee, one share, that kills off the power of Facebook. What is your proposal?
I was going to say that. Hang on, I was going to be even more awkward.
I'll give you my proposal in a second.
Oi, Yanis, behave. Right. Gosh, it's thrown out. It's thrown. You are behaving beautifully. Just in your way. No, what I was thinking about what you said about the regulator, which was an interesting thought. But look, there's an example, Gillian, where how many people, eminent people in America and elsewhere, run around in circles saying we need better regulation than tech companies. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't give up. Anyway, it just doesn't happen. To this point, I think Yanis is right to be pushing on this.
Yeah, sure.
It would appear to be an area which is immune to the sort of reformist, regulatory
Okay, let me give my answer to Facebook, what I do about Facebook, and it's different from what you expect. There's one thing that Adam Smith got totally wrong, in fact, several things, but here's the most important thing for today. He thought that barter was an old-fashioned, prehistoric practice that really just involved cavemen sitting around in caves swapping piles of berries for meat. And he presumed that barter would essentially die out once you invented money and credit. He was 100% wrong. Economists automatically assume that barter is old-fashioned and doesn't matter. Anthropologists, and I don't know if there are any anthropologists here tonight.
This is your moment.
Anthropologists know that barter is actually something which has often been around in many communities at the same time as money and credit. Anyone who's read David Graeber's wonderful book, Debt the First 5,000 Years, will know this. But
How
also,
is this going to help us with the tech
I'm going to tell you, barter is alive and well today, big time, because Silicon Valley actually runs off barter. The wholesale swap of data for services. That is the bedrock of much of the tech sector today. It does not involve money, and we have no way of talking about it day to day except to say that it's free. And we tend to only focus on one aspect of this, which is how tech companies take our data. We don't look at the services. The reason I say this is important because actually we're missing a lot of things that are happening in the economy today, and also in terms of corporate valuations. We're also missing something that I would expect. If I was to go to all of you in the room today and say, would you like to pay for your services that you get from Google, Facebook, your email? Would you like to use money to buy all that? And in exchange, they can't take your data or they'll pay you for it. You might say, well, yes, for privacy reasons. But I guess that many of you would actually say, you know what? I don't want the hassle of having to use money to pay for it. I like getting free services. So the reason I mention all this is really important. If you want to reform tech today and create a more ethical tech system, you don't necessarily need to abolish barter. You need to change the terms of trade of barter. And that means essentially giving consumers more power in that barter trade, which involves, one, more transparency about how data is being used, more transparency about what the companies are doing inside the company with your data, and most crucially, and this comes back to the power of market forces, data portability. If we had the ability to pull our data out of any tech company and go somewhere else, we'd actually have the beginnings of a proper market for our service, for us as customers. If you put the onus on tech companies to guarantee data portability, then you'd get the beginnings of a proper market. And I'll say two more things quickly. Yeah. I think that competition would be more effective in giving consumers power and actually saying, you know what, I hate what Facebook has done, so I'm going to pull my data away and go somewhere else, than it would actually be in terms of regulation. And there is a model for it already, and it's called finance. If you change your bank account today, the onus is on the bank to ensure that your money goes from one bank to another. It's not on you. You don't have to go and sort of basically physically, get your pile of cash out and put it to another bank. That company is required to move your money. That is what we should have for tech companies today, along with better oversight, along with looking at breaking up platform control and monopolies in terms of vertical platforms. But actually, that is why consumer power and competition matters.
Convinced?
Yes and no. Let me start with a no.
Okay, I take that as a B+.
Well, that's what you get with when you have an economist. On the one hand, on the other hand, you remember what Truman said? I want a one-handed economist. I'm convinced that we need to change property rights over data, over personal data. So here we are on, and actually in my topic, Other Now, you'll find that there is a system called...
Okay, and if you haven't seen it, I'm going to show that I like Yanis.
Don't buy it. Just there is, I describe various systems. One is, how banking would work in my socialist market system, and also how data should work. And I have a system where I came up with the label "a penny for your thought." So, tiny micropayments that are automatically made by people so that they can also own their own data. So we are on the same page on this. But what you're suggesting is not doing anything about the power of Facebook, anything about the power of Amazon, because let's face it, the reason why people are in Facebook is because everybody else is in Facebook. So it's economies of scale and economies of scope, and there is nothing you can do about that by changing the system.
Yanis, do you have kids?
One more thing.
Teenagers aren't on Facebook. Do you have kids? Teenagers wouldn't be seen dead on Facebook. Fashions change surprisingly fast.
Okay, whatever. I mean, the people who are on TikTok, they will be on TikTok because the people they follow are on TikTok. So these are the network economies, which you understand very well. And when it comes to Amazon, there is this technological structure that supports a whole economy that is non-market and based on power. And there's nothing you can do about that if you stick to the idea of liquid property that is owned and traded in share markets.
I want to bring us to something else, and of course feel free to come back to this, so we just need to sort of move through a couple more cycles of themes perhaps before we get to questions. It would be very remiss, I think, on the road to COP26 not to talk about poor old planet Earth and the impact of capitalism on planet Earth, and whether you think, Gillian, that green growth is possible. I know you're a big, if you can be a big cheese, can you be a big cheese in ESG, a big environmentally friendly produced cheese in this area, suggests that you do believe in green growth. But there are many reasons, are there not, if we look around the planet today and man-made global warming, to say that capitalism has played a very negative role in that and to be rather sceptical.
Yep, I'd come back to the fourth part of the Adam Smith framework I laid out about the need to have a shared ethical, moral, legal vision, and above all else, a theme that I go on about in my book, which is the need to move from tunnel vision to lateral vision. Most of the tools that we developed in the late 20th century to make sense of the world, like economic models, apologies, Yanis, because I know you're an economist, but these lovely economic models, these lovely corporate balance sheets, these lovely big data sets are all very bounded and marked by tunnel vision.
You don't have to apologize because I agree with you.
Well, I was trying to needle you. But they basically treat everything that isn't inside the economic model or the balance sheet as an externality or a footprint, something outside that model. And what I would argue is that one of the things that went very badly wrong with a lot of the corporate vision and the economic models was treating the environment as an externality. They ignored who was going to pay for the damage that was created or the cost of the natural resources they were using.
That's quite a big flaw in the capitalist argument, then.
Well, if you could actually start measuring that and putting that into your models, you start to get a very different vision of how companies are valued, how they're looking at the world. There are ways of doing that, and people are developing that. Impact-weighted accounting.
Impact-weighted accounting.
ESG accounting.
I'm wondering if this is going to thrill Yanis, impact-weighted accounting.
Well, for that you need the regulation that you are never going to be able to have as long as power is so heavily concentrated. Look, let me give you an example, because we didn't manage to meet Anne this summer because half of Greece burned.
Because you just turned me down.
No, because half of Greece burned down, and I was going from. By the way, you know,
that exactly is what happened. Actually, in fairness, just to not be. We weren't going
and
to
you missed an important part of my CV in these days. You know, I lead a political party in Greece. You presented me as if I'm an author and professor.
I did.
That's a previous life.
So he actually has power.
Your registered voters.
No power.
And you're very free.
You aspire to have power.
No, but the reason why I mentioned the fires is because, look, speaking of green growth, okay, I also believe that in green growth, but I also believe in green degrowth. There are things that need to grow and things that need to degrow. Like we need less cement, less CO2, less of all the toxic derivatives, the toxic fumes, right? We need fewer of those things, fewer cars, whether they're electric or not, more public transport. But going back to the forest fires in Greece this summer. Greece is a failed state, right? But nevertheless, when it comes to profit making, it's very fast. So the day after, we were devastated and the flames died down. Large corporations came and took over the attempt to prevent those forests from becoming mud baths with the first rains. So you think, oh, that's a good thing. They came to help shore up the soil and all that. First thing they did was to offer contracts to the local population that effectively signed all their rights away for 20 euros a day. Okay, forget that. You could expect that. The second thing they did was they are trying to win new contracts for replanting the forests using genetically modified trees that will grow very quickly, and they will give them the opportunity to, in the context of the green transition, harvest biomass for the purposes of green energy. if we allow them to do this, you're going to have, under the cover of green growth, you're going to have the devastation of the flora and the fauna of the land, and the conversion of these areas in Evia and so on into fiefdoms of Monsanto Bayer, who will have genetically poisoned the land while making it very green. Now, is this the green growth that we want? This is the green growth that this market-based system, not because it's a market, but because Monsanto is not a market.
Okay,
they are a toxic monolith.
Let me come back to this point again. As I said, you are on your home pitch. There are numerous examples of greenwashing. There's numerous examples of companies and financiers using the green label to do all kinds of egregious things. That I would completely agree with. However, one of the other reasons I believe in competition is that I believe in checks and balances. And I don't think we can sit there and trust government alone to turn us green. Back in the 1970s, when Milton Friedman developed his vision of shareholder capitalism, which I do not agree with, there were two things that were very different. One, back then, people thought that they could outsource the really difficult decisions in life, the social stuff, to governments, and companies just worried about their balance sheets. And secondly, you did not have radical transparency, and most people did not know what was actually happening inside companies. Today, we have a world where no one actually trusts the government to get stuff done, and we have a world where all of you have cell phones with extraordinary levels of access to information if you choose, and many aspects of corporate life are subject to radical transparency. The reason that you know so quickly about what was happening in those forests is precisely because of this radical transparency. So I come back to the point. It's not an either-or. We don't need government or companies to be green, or NGOs. We actually benefit by having different groups in society doing this. It is a good thing that actually we're not just relying on the Greek government alone to deal with replanting those forests. It's good that we have citizens armed with cell phones giving you the data you just quoted, and it's good that we've had companies coming in and feeling the need to do something about it, even if they are being essentially driven by less than virtuous principles, and even if some of the things they're doing are wrong. Many of the things that companies are doing today are better than they were doing 2 or 3 decades ago. So my question to you, Yanis, is this. Would you wind back the clock and have companies to go back to where they were 20 or 30 years ago? Would you only rely on government, the governments we have, to turn us green? Because look back what's happened in the last decade. It ain't been so good. One of the reasons why governments are under pressure to come to COP26 and do something is partly because there is a shift in zeitgeist amongst investors and businesses that reflects social shifts that comes back to radical transparency.
Come back on that, because we then must open up to a very patient audience.
You're quite clearly mistaking me for one of those socialists that likes the state. I loathe the state, in the same way that I loathe Monsanto and Bayer, right? So my worry, Gillian, is that the state and those large corporations are in cahoots. They're working together. And, I want diversity. I want people who live in these areas to be empowered to do things without either Bayer or Monsanto, descending upon them and effectively taking them over, or the state saying, oh, I will fix everything for you. The question is, how do you empower communities with the necessary capital, the necessary expertise, and leave them to their own devices in order to do stuff? I think that is the future. The future is for living neither under the thumb of the state nor under the thumb of corporate capital. Those companies that go in there are not going there to do anything good because of transparency. By the way, the transparency is an illusion, because I'm telling you now what most of those people know in those areas of the forests, but I can tell you that not one television station, not one radio station, not one newspaper has ever reported on what is really happening on the ground, because they are owned by the same corporate interests.
Newsflash, not everyone gets their news anymore from newspapers, much as I'd love them to do it.